we're going to go ahead and get started today, and thank you all for joining us. I assume we'll have some people probably pop on. Welcome back. Technically, this is the last of the Last Dance sessions, but we've really enjoyed this community, and we'd like to keep this going if there's interest in it. And so one of the things that we're going to end with today is, I think, some polling that April has constructed to get feedback on how you guys want to push this forward, right? So we're the conveners, but we don't view this as our community. And we actually talked yesterday, and we don't want to be ignorant to the fact of what's going on around us in our communities. And I'm gonna let Marvin and Andre chime in on their perspectives of what's going on surrounding the protests, the economic inequality associated with it, the obviously violence, the police violence towards African Americans nationwide, and we want to hear what you all have to say about that. Also, what I will say from my personal perspective is, I will continue to do whatever I can to use my platform to share my platform with people who don't have a platform to have these discussions. And Nate's on this call. I love Nate. Nate has always been very forthright with opportunities to improve our academic programs with things like REI, trainings and things along those lines. You will see those in Bloch School programming that I run, and I will continue to advocate for that across the Bloch School as a whole, so that we can continue to be on the forefront of creating ending economic inequality, which is actually part of the Bloch School mission and vision. So that's all I'm going to say about it. Marvin, Andre, I'll let you guys weigh in, and then we'd like to throw it out to the community to weigh in on their thoughts and just have, an area.
Andre, do you want to go first? I don't like following you because usually you take up all the time, but if
that's a good
you want to start, you can, Andre.
Well, if Marvin goes, we're going to be here for 4 hours, so we may want to just speed it up a little bit. So, no, I'm really interested to get feedback, and we know we got Rodney Smith on here, and him and his wife do a lot of that conversation. So, with REI training and all that. So I think I'm optimistic, right? Because I can't tell you the number of people who are not of color that have reached out to me and just asked, how you doing? How you handling everything? And, we support you, we stand by you and all that. So that's a really good step. I'm also optimistic too, because we've never seen, at least in my time, we've never seen in this country the type of people that are now protesting, young, white, black, brown, yellow, you name it, indigenous, everyone is protesting. So everyone stood up. We've also never seen in my time too, the amount of leadership within law enforcement come out and call it for what it was, which was a virtual murder, not their words, my words. And so I am optimistic. There's a lot of work to do. And so my thing is, we take all of how we feel, what do we do with it? So what I've encouraged people that have reached out to me to do is use your voice, use your platform, use your privilege, and speak out. If you are seeing people, and we won't get too deep because this could be another 4-hour conversation. If you are seeing people speak out against the what, but not the why, call it out. Talk about that, right? We see the looting, we see the rioting. We don't agree with the rioting and looting, but we understand it. But if you're only calling out the rioting, the looting, and you're not talking about the murder, that's a problem. You call that out and you make people aware, because some people, good friends of mine, are very unconscious to it. They don't even know they're doing it. So we have to have that conversation. So I'm hoping that everything that's happening now really speeds us into some action in a lot of different ways. And so I'll leave it at that, and I'll just look for feedback. Once Marvin gets done with this dissertation, we'll look for some feedback.
Epistle. It's a epistle.
I think, obviously, I stay optimistic, just like Andre said. There are a lot of moving parts and pieces to this situation that we find ourselves in. My biggest concern is this isn't the first time. We get excited and everyone kind of, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And it goes up and then it comes right back down. And I don't think there have been many situations where really not much has changed. My hope is that things will change. from my perspective, I'm a business guy. The socioeconomic impact is huge. And it plays a major role in a lot of things that we're talking about. If you look at the wealth gap between African Americans and whites, it's huge. The income gap is huge. The health gap, how healthy are we gap, is huge. All of the major categories that are measured, African Americans don't do well. We have to address these things, and they all play together. Obviously, we are here to talk about sports and how sports translates over into business, but there's a spot for this too. I hope that there's genuine change on some sort of a level. I think everyone's concerned. I think everyone's focused on it right now, but it's not a short-term thing that we address. It's not a short-term fix. It's a long-term, a long process that it would take to turn the current situation. And I hope that we pay enough attention to it. And we all use our specialty. Mine being business, there's some social, there's some mental, there's a lot of things, different areas that need to be impacted. It's just not one fix. It's just not business. It's just not social. It's just not health. There's a lot of different avenues. And I hope that we start addressing each one as we find experts in those areas who are willing to take it on at least where they live or where they work. So that's my 2 minutes of
Nailed it.
commentary.
You nailed it, Marvin. We do want to hear from you guys. Part of what we're doing today, we're flipping the schedule a little bit with our hour. And if we don't get to breakouts, that's okay. We're going to get into coaching and performance next, but we wanted to give you all an opportunity to share your thoughts on how this affects leadership, business, yourself personally, anything.
I've got a question that I'd like to throw out to Marvin and Andre that relates to coaching. I'm sure you guys have seen the situation at the University of Iowa with their strength and conditioning coach. Do you have any opinions on that? In those first couple sessions where we talked about, Michael Jordan being such a grinder on his teammates, and for this to come out, it seems like there's definitely a fine line that is there, and it appears, in my opinion, that guy crossed that line pretty significantly. But I'd love to get your guys' feedback and perspective on that.
I don't know that story. I have missed that story. So JP, just catch us up to speed real quick.
Yeah, I'm from Iowa, not an Iowa Hawkeye fan, but born and raised in Iowa. And their strength and conditioning coach has been accused by, I believe, 39 players now of people of color, saying that there have been some racially charged comments that he's made. Just to gloss over a little bit of that, for instance, he had encouraged one of the players to quit football and take up rowing, except he made the joke that Black people were afraid of boats and water. He had always made reference to sending people back to the ghetto, and the Hawkeye players spoke up against these. A lot of former ones that are currently in the NFL had spoke up against this, but they also came at it, I thought, very wisely or compassionately of, we just want to see things get better. This is not, let's burn the place down. This is, we think there's a problem. We're addressing that problem. We think Iowa is great, but we think it can be better. So let's do it. He's on administrative leave currently, and the expectation is he will be fired through all of this. So just to give some clarity to the situation.
And I heard the head coach responding, and he was, he gave the typical response. That's not the way we are. I want everyone to feel welcome here. We need to make some changes. I think on a certain level, especially with sports, we become too familiar with each other, and sometimes we say the wrong things in trying to motivate people and energize people. And when we get comfortable, we ride a slippery slope, because we're really good friends. So I can say some things that are overboard, or I'm just trying to motivate you. Doesn't make it right. I don't know the coach, so I can't really speak to his character individually, but I think in his effort to motivate and relate to, I think he went overboard. And I
Yeah.
think
So what?
obviously, I don't, most times, with most coaches I have, they're trying to use anything they know to motivate you. To get you to lift that bench press 2 more times. They're going to tell you to do anything, to run the time a little bit faster. You know, come on, you're running like a girl. That's not the best statement to say, but that's said often. You know, you're running like this, or you're lifting like this. Anything to motivate you. Not in depth familiar with exactly everything he did. I don't know him personally, but these things are said and done in an effort to motivate you. But there's always that line. Did you cross over that line into something that you said or something that you did that just wasn't right? And that could be an avenue. Like I said, I don't know that, but that could be something that happens. And you know, there's different things that happen in the workplace. I didn't mean it that way, but that's the way you took it. So that would be what I would say.
Yeah. So me just hearing that story, JP, my first instinct is that wasn't the first time that he's used that. Also, I would probably suggest that leadership at a high level knew that there were complaints and probably did nothing in a situation like that. I don't necessarily, agree with what Marvin said in terms of trying to motivate, because I think there are other ways to motivate. And I think when you're using that phraseology, you have been comfortable using that phrase with other people who weren't of color. You get into a situation like that, and you have people that are brown and black, and you start to use that. Those are feelings, right? There are other ways to motivate. You don't have to talk about someone's ethnicity, right? So I think my gut suggests that he probably felt the way he communicated, and leadership knew, and it blew up. And so the statement is, we're going to look at it. We're going to, the whole generic thing that you insert whatever university you want. And so I think that's a problem. But what I would say in situations like that, people that are around that coach, leadership, whoever, should be speaking out, pulling that person aside and saying, you can't do that. You absolutely can't motivate that way. There's other ways. That's wrong, right? And so when we're at a moment now where we have to choose, right? Are we going to just kind of go, wow, and then say nothing, knowing it's wrong? We won't say anything. We know it's wrong. You shouldn't do it. I think I would hope that we're at a point now where we wouldn't let that happen. We wouldn't let it in our corporations. We wouldn't let it in board meetings. We wouldn't let it in leadership meetings. And we would go, can't do that, and speak out to that. And so that would be my first thought of that. That's what a leader is, right? Is when it's not popular, are you vocal or are you quiet? Even in your quietness, you're communicating. You just don't realize you are.
Thanks, guys.
Elijah, I think you were going to say something earlier. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I think one of the positive things that I think from this is that just the conversations that I've been able to have with people, that's been the biggest thing. And I've been trying to push a narrative from a business standpoint is that, there are certain topics that we don't talk about, or we shouldn't talk about politics, religion, that kind of stuff. But honestly, time to change. And I feel like we need to talk about these things because that's our life now. That's how we live. And we shouldn't just hide behind, well, we can talk about politics or that kind of stuff. And so one of the conversations that I had yesterday actually with the lady was that she was like, she's like, I mean, I live in Iowa, right? Like I see corn and cows, right? Racism, what does that mean? I mean, I don't do anything like that. And we kept talking, and then she said something to me. She was like, like if I saw Michael Jordan walk around the street, I wouldn't know what he looked like. Oh, that's interesting, whatever. So then she pinged me today and was like, I'm so sorry because I didn't really think about that the comment, you may take it as that all Black people look the same, But the fact that she actually thought about it, took a pause and thought about it, like, so that's the positive steps that we are looking for. That's the thing we're looking for, that people are actually thinking about these things, knowing these things, and then basically making the right changes, actually be better than I told her too. I was like, like being better is our mission as a human being. We should get better every day. And so this is just one of those steps that we're doing, but we should all strive to get better. And I was like, oh, that's exactly what this is happening for. It's for us to all sit down, take a beat, think about things, and then figure out how do we get better from this. So I think that's been one of the positive things that I've seen throughout this experience for the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think great perspective. Great perspective.
This will be shockingly quick, but I would really appreciate, this is David Oliver, I would really appreciate the three of you, and maybe anybody else on this call, you can put it on chat, creating a syllabus of things that we can read. We need to be spending a lot more time listening, not assuming we understand what's going on. I am seeing articles in the newspapers and other magazines, et cetera, that I read on a regular basis, but I want to branch out from what I read on a regular basis. And I need help in truly understanding what's going on right now and not make assumptions. So, you know, but I think Scott, Marvin, and Andre, if you could create a syllabus and share it with us, and it can be ongoing, that would be great.
Yeah.
Dave, have you seen 13th on Netflix
Yes.
yet?
Yeah, that's a good documentary.
That's a big one. That one's one that really kind of opened people's eyes in a different way, I think, to historical data, what's been going on in a long-term sense.
Yeah, well, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that as a 68-year-old white male, I am old enough to remember the spring and summer of 1968. And as a 16-year-old, that had a huge impact on me, both the assassination of Martin Luther King, all the protests and riots that broke out across the country after that. And then, you know, a month later, you have Robert Kennedy assassinated. You have violence in Chicago with the Democratic Convention, and we have these things coming up now. We're really in it, and it's going to be different than it was in 1968. And so we all have to be educating each other as to what the reality today is and what we can do about it.
Rodney, jump in there. I know you were itching.
Yeah, I echo David's comments and with regard to reading. You know, a lot of times people are asking for things to do and what can I do? Reading has ing on the end of it because it's something that you're doing, right? But because the goal is after you read something that your thinking will change and your habits will change, your actions will then change. But what I was going to also echo what some of Andre and Marvin said with regards to the incident in Iowa and also the incidents that we've been seeing here in the media relative to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all those African-American bodies and brown bodies and black bodies. We're seeing lifeless, taking the life out. We see life leaving their bodies. What I among many things that I lament about those kinds of situations, even the situation at the University of Iowa, is that they serve as distractions. And I know that may sound a bit different than what you probably expect me to say or hear you expect. What I mean by that is we then get focused on these overt acts of racism because they are acts of racism, but those overt acts of racism are birthed from systemic racism and structural racism that this exists in everyday life because the culture allows for that to happen. And so therefore, to Andre's point, this young man had probably been doing and living in this sea of racism that we all live in. I mean, it's akin to living in a city affected by smog. We can't say that we're not breathing smog in when we live in a city that's affected by smog. You know, we're all breathing it in whether we want to or not. And so these individual acts of racism distract us from how racism happens on a normal, everyday basis. It's very tacit. It's very unassuming. It's very, subtle. We don't necessarily see it, but it is always around us. You know what I mean? And so we have to find ways to address, yes, those forms of racism, but I think the more common form of racism is the everyday form of racism in our hiring practices, in our healthcare system, to Marvin's point, in our educational system, because, you know, I'm in education. You know, in education, we call it the achievement gap, right? What is the gap between races, you know, and in the healthcare system?
I think your fries are done, Rodney.
Huh?
I think your fries are done.
And in the healthcare community, we call it health disparities, the health disparities among races. In the criminal justice system, we call it a disproportionate minority contact. I mean, you can name it in each industry, but it's all trying to address racism, right?
Yeah.
It's all trying to address racism, and we need to say that, and not and we need to call those overt acts out as well. But what I would describe those acts as, what we saw with George Floyd and the like, those are acts of hate mongering. But racism, we all participate in it on a daily basis. You know, be it internalized racial oppression or internalized racial superiority, because we believe that there's a superior group and there's an inferior group or groups,
Right.
and we have to be honest with ourselves about that. You know,
Right.
I can refer to you. This is a study that I love to talk about and help people understand how race really works. Because there's a study by some scholars at the University of Chicago. The title of the study, you can look it up, are Emily and Greg more employable than Jamal and Lakeisha? So these scholars at the University of Chicago created these generic resumes, sent it out to would-be employers. I think it was 1,300 would-be employers, equal opportunity employer organizations, mind you. They sent out the resumes. The female resume had the name Emily and Lakeisha, and the male resume had the name Gregory and Jamal. And there were two names that got a callback rate at 50% higher than the other two names. You tell me what two names were called back at a higher rate. You already know. You didn't even read the study. Many of you, some of you may have heard of the study, but some of you may not even read the study, but you know who got a callback rate higher. And then those individuals will suggest that the implicit bias revealed themselves. What was the bias about? The bias was about race. And so that's how race happens on an everyday basis in our lives, and we don't call it out as such. And so I agree with Andre in that it is not okay just to be a non-racist. You have to be anti-racist.
Totally.
It's akin to not being a non-bully. If you see somebody bullying, it's not okay to say, well, I'm not bullying them. No, it's you have to intervene. It's anti-bullying is the goal. The same too is with racism. Yeah.
So I agree with 100% of what you just said, Rodney. So thank you for that. I do think that because I try to be a solution-oriented guy, and there's a tremendous role that higher ed can play in this as well. And so Scott talked about me mentioning REI training. I think in addition to that, because it's there's multiple phases of REI training. It gets, I think, pretty expensive once you get past that first phase. So another thing that I think would be really, really good is for, if you're in this higher ed environment, being able to sort of force conversations upon students, right? Engage them in a way that creates some discomfort. And it's hard and it's probably not fun on the front end, but it's needed. Scott, I remember there was one of your classes where we had, it was fairly brief, right? But you started to bring out in students, let's talk about your individual sort of political perspectives. And that gets really messy really fast. But this gets even messier, even faster, in my opinion. And to some degree, it ties into the political piece of it as well. But forcing those conversations on a fairly regular basis with students to challenge people's belief systems is a really, really important part of being able to sort of have the conversation and get people to a place where we can at least agree on some facts. And that's what REI a lot is about, right? Is getting people to understand there's this base level of facts that you can't really argue with, at least not logically argue with.
Right.
And then build on top of those facts in a way that brings people's emotions out and starts to challenge how we were brought up and why we believe what we believe. So that's, I think I'd like to see that going forward at UMKC is how do we go challenge each one of the students to really talk about how they feel, why they feel that way, and then move to a place of, I'll call it reconciliation, if that can even be a thing in a conversation like this.
Right.
Yeah, Nate, it's a good point. I'm glad that you. I do an exercise where I ask people to reveal their biases, and I start by revealing mine as a professor, which I hope kind of helps create the environment where that can take place. And fortunately, I'm always uncomfortable with people, so that's not any more difficult for me than just any other normal human interaction I have with other individuals. So it works out well for me. But I value this kind of conversation, and candidly, this probably is a springboard to where Marvin, Andre, and I have thought maybe this Wednesday conversation can continue, which is how do we improve the economic sectors of Kansas City by having difficult conversations like this.
Yeah.
Which these are leadership conversations, right? I mean, that doesn't, to Andre's point, that doesn't happen in a vacuum in that Iowa football program. We know that Ferentz knew about those comments.
Yeah.
He had to have known about those comments.
Yeah.
Similar, the parallel to me is Penn State, right? And what was going on at Penn State. Like, it's the culture that allows that to happen. It doesn't just happen outside of the culture. And
you don't get agitated, and the first thing you use is a racial epithet. You don't do that, right?
No,
You'd have
I'm agitated all the time. And
right, you already had to have those feelings for that to come out of your being. And so we need to grapple with that. We need to be honest with that. And that's where the leadership piece comes in for me, is we need to call it what it is. And to Rodney's point, we need to be anti-racist. And what you're seeing, which feels different to me, and I talked to my 75-year-old mother about this. She never thought she would see a time again where we are today. But it feels different because when you look at the people that are peacefully protesting, right? Not the other stuff, which is about 1% of what's happening. When you look at the people that are peacefully protesting, you've never seen that diversity in any protest. The amount of it, age, young, ethnicity, gender, etc. So it gives you great hope. And so the thing is, we need to be able to have these conversations. And to Rodney's point, when someone is saying, yeah, but I'm not really bullying, but you are because you didn't say anything. Well, you're witnessing the bully, right?
Yeah, and I want to elevate what Elijah said.
Yeah.
I am sick and tired of people saying we don't talk about money, politics, and religion in this society. Like, so what you're saying is we don't talk about the three most important things to our daily lives, right? And so I actually think we can create spaces in companies where it's not necessarily, you don't make it compulsory, but where people who voluntarily want to engage in meaningful, respectful dialogue and listening. And I'll give you an example of a company that did it really well. Kroger. Dave Dillon has talked about this when he's come and talked to my classes about having groups, committees, and groups of people who would just meet regularly to talk about these kind of things and how it relates. I mean, you could have that easy conversation. And to me, it's easy, what Elijah was talking about, of having an inclusion group, that anyone who wants to come at Cerner could come and talk about ways that we're not being inclusive and the ways we are being inclusive, or things we could do better. And you can have these difficult conversations, and religion's going to come up, race is going to come up, sexual orientation is going to come up, gender bias. We need to be talking about these things.
I don't think it. I mean, I think we make it a little bit simpler than it is. I don't think the everyday person is as overtly racist or biased. There's an unconscious bias that we all have. If you talk to the average white person, let's say that, they're not going out aggressively doing something against the African American person, but some of the policies and some of their unconscious bias create that. In the diversity realm, I talk about it often. We hire people who look like us. So if everybody at the top is white, I'm not trying to be racist. This is my group. And I said, hey, you have to aggressively change that pattern. You just can't say, well, because that's what I would do if most of my colleagues were African American and I would need to hire somebody, I would hire somebody that looks like me. But I have to aggressively and pay attention in a different way. Now that person, I hope we wouldn't describe as, oh, that's just a racist person hiring all white people on all levels. That's not true. But we have to pay attention to it differently. And I think that's what we're saying. Because they get up every day, they may have a black friend. But what I'm saying is that we have to be more conscious, and it's not that easy. Because no one gets up, most people get up every day not trying to be racist or biased or any other thing, or attacking another race. But some of the natural things that they do are racist, are biased, but they don't know.
Right.
And they continue to do them.
Right.
So Marvin, I just have to say this, David Oliver, there is no average white person, okay? Like, I don't think there's any average black person, okay?
Right.
And I think a lot of things that come across as racist are actually ignorance. that we don't take the time to get to know each other. And that's why I think discussions like Scott is saying, like, I was raised in a family that was very heterodox as far as political views, etc. And at dinner, we would have very robust civil discussions. And so I'm used to having these types of conversations and don't understand why we don't get to know people and put our own, as Scott said, put our own prejudices out there. I think some of my prejudices are bad. I also think some of my prejudices are pretty good. I'm prejudiced towards science as opposed to alchemy, things like that.
But one thing I will say, what changes things is when you become closer to somebody who's different than you.
Destroys ignorance.
And then you get a
Exactly,
chance.
exactly.
And then you get and then you get a chance to see sometimes what they go through.
Yes.
If you have someone who's gay, who's a friend of yours, and then all of a sudden some other people start talking about, gay people, you're like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And then, maybe when you have an African-American friend, and when they leave, the white friend starts saying, well, they got diversity stuff. And you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
The closer you become, if you have somebody of a different race or a different gender or whatever around you, close to you, and you start seeing and feeling some of the things that they go through, it changes you.
Kim,
and I think that's big.
Kim wants to get in here. Let me get Kim Randolph in here.
I was just going to hit on something that Marvin said. Marvin said, having a Black friend. And somewhere in this scenario, we have to take ownership for our part in the racism as a Black friend, because I've known a lot of Black friends who have been okay with a joke or the derogatory conversation with their white friends. And so sometimes we have to be careful in how we give people permission on how to treat us. I've had to say on many occasions, that's not cool. What you just said, that was offensive. I didn't find it funny. I didn't find it okay. Just because you're my friend doesn't mean that you can talk in that manner or even make statements about the urban core, about the situation. And I'm going to agree with it, because a great example that Andre brought up was the riot. They're focusing on the looting and the rioting, but have you looked at the history of why? There was no focus on the history of the rioting when Bull Connor was closing down people and they were burning down churches, and Black Wall Street when they found the whole town. So if we're going to look at it, let's not just look at this one piece. We want to look at the why. Why are people doing this? And if we're not speaking this to the people that we relate to that are white, we're just condoning the situation. We're continuing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Thank you, Kim.
So in the leadership conversation world, I think all of us are very open and very honest people and very willing to speak. So I think I 100% agree with everything you guys are saying. Like, my eyes have been open because in my office that I work with downtown, I am the minority there. I have 3 African-American women that I work with, and I listen to them tell stories about how they have to raise their sons and the things they have to worry about. And those are the things that have affected me. But as leaders, I think we have to figure out how we get people to speak to each other, to listen and understand. So how do we as a group teach people to communicate without being defensive from the go? Because if I say, Kim, you said somebody correcting you, if you're a friend and you say something like that to me, then yes, I might correct myself, but I could still be like, don't tell me I'm wrong if I have my own feelings. So how do we get people to actually listen and actually have those conversations with listening ears? Because if you're defensive, it's not going to go anywhere from the start.
Jenna, thank you for bringing that up, because that is a perfect segue to an article I posted in our LinkedIn group.
Nice job, Jenna. Nice work.
Which I highly recommend to everybody as we transition into coaching. I don't know how many of you checked out the article. It's the Harvard Business Review article. I know Andre did, because he sent me some feedback on it.
Yeah, it's a good article.
Finding the criticism in coaching. And I love this article because it resonates with me. the other thing, but the other reason I like it is I use it both as a leader and as someone who takes criticism, right? So like one of the first things that immediately comes up, Jenna, and you were talking about this, is when someone gives us criticism, we actually have a physiological response to it. So you're leading an organization, you're giving someone criticism, recognize right off the bat that they're going to have some physiological response that they've had probably since they were 5 years old, right? That dates back all that far. And so how can we work with people that we work in our shop? Thank you for posting that, April. The first thing is just begin to help them learn to identify what their physiological responses are to things and to take a breath and take a break before they respond to the criticism. And I have to learn that too. Like my ears get hot. I feel like I get flushed in the face. And I work really hard when I'm getting criticism to not have any facial expression, because I know if any expression comes out, it's not going to be a good one.
Right.
Yeah, I think I find for me criticism is I can take it, whether it's from a coaching or perspective or from just someone I'm interacting with. I can take it a lot easier if it's coming from a person that I don't have any sort of personal connection with, right? I don't know the person. I don't necessarily value or devalue their opinion, right? It's easier. But when it comes from a person that you actually care about, it's a lot more challenging. And so, recent example, actually, Scott, you were giving me some criticism first in coaching, and there's a critique in there about my performance on a presentation that we had last semester. And man, it hurt. It stung, right? Because I respect Scott, right? I value him as a leader, and we've become friends. And so it stung, and I had to step away and go, oh, it was actually legitimate, right? It was real stuff that came from what was the right intent was there. Right. And oh, by the way, my wife had given me the same criticism the night before, and I didn't listen.
Then it's correct.
There's a lesson after 21 years of marriage. I still haven't figured it out. I should just shut up and listen to her at all times. But it stung, right? And so in the moment, for me at least, it's very difficult to separate the emotional and physiological reaction that I'm having from whether or not the criticism is actually real. Right, and understanding the intent in which it's being delivered. So I think any sort of personal strategies that come out of a conversation like this that I can then go leverage in the future is super important to me.
Yeah,
Nancy, did you want to get in?
Go ahead, Nancy.
You're unmuted.
I'm soaking this all in and thinking so many things.
Okay.
First, I'm glad to be part of the conversation. This is the first one I've joined, so I'm sorry for everything I've missed. It sounds like great conversation, and I'm just sitting here thinking, one, shaking my head because so I am with Agriculture Future of America. We're a nonprofit. We provide leader development, training, and career exposure to people in food and agriculture. So when you talk about having this conversation with younger audiences, in the formal or informal education realm, I'm right there. There's our own biases and challenges in food and agriculture that are changing and developing over time. For lots of different reasons that we're trying to tackle. And I echo what's been said about like creating relationships first. And that's, I think, one of the most challenging things for young people is to dedicate the time and force the interaction, because we all find our natural communities, and we have to like blow that up in order to have this productive conversation. And we're trying to figure some of that out. We've been on an internal journey, I'd say, to make sure that we're doing the right things in the environments we create. And somebody mentioned like calling it out or calling out the challenging moments. And that's one of the things that we saw a couple of years ago where, we put on a conference, we have somebody say something that's not on par or not right. And we have a group of college students there that are the ones in the room that would be the ones to call it out. And they didn't feel comfortable or confident enough to do that. So we started there to say, how do we work internally to make sure we're all good in this space and they feel equipped to, when we put them in a broader environment, to recognize, acknowledge, and call out, what we don't want to manifest itself, in a broader population. So I don't necessarily have something to add, but I love this dialogue, and we're trying to figure out what our platform is to take what has been an internal conversation in those ways more external with a college audience in our industry.
I will say this, and we touched on it last week, and we talked about coaching, we talked about managing, we talked about leadership, and Andre expressed how how he does it, and his was much better and softer and gentler. He was giving hugs.
No, it's not better. It's just
and I said, I'm maybe I'm a little more old school. I'm a little more direct, and that's not always the way that we do things now. I don't want people to miss. Sometimes we soften things up, and I get criticized sometimes for it. We soften up so much that the whole point is missed. I don't think anyone that I've ever managed or led or coached or whatever didn't like it at the end. And the same thing with Michael Jordan. I push people. I push people to make people feel uncomfortable, to get the best out of them. And I have got the best out of people. But sometimes when you look at it, and we talked offline about this, they're all warm and fuzzy, and let's just send an emoji, happy birthday, Merry Christmas. No, the deadline, I need it by the end of the week. I'm not sending any emojis. We've talked about this before, and I'm exaggerating a little bit now, but not much. We have a deadline.
Not, though.
And I've worked in the area of sales, which is the revenue generators of a company. And we have deadlines, and we have to get to them. And so they were beating me up and saying, Marvin, you're too direct. And it is a different culture. This is a different culture than I grew up in. When I first started, hey, let's put the numbers up on the board. Now it's like, well, don't put everybody up on the board, because the people in last place might feel bad. I don't care. They need to feel bad. I need to get them up. And so they beat me up. So I'm a little more quieter, and I'm not going to say much, but I wanted to say that I did get beat up for my direct approach.
He didn't get beat
hopefully
up.
You guys feel sorry for me.
No, he did not get beat up. He won't get any Christmas cards from his employees for sure, but he did not get beat up. So yeah, Marv and I have a little different nuance about this whole approach thing, right? So I've always been taught to be very quick to praise and be very slow to criticize. Marvin talked about his criticism, how Scott and I and April kind of criticized Marvin for being so direct. My thought, and Nate, you struck me at.
I love Marvin.
I'm giving Marvin a big virtual hug right now, man. I have a lot of love for Marvin. That's why we're doing this together, because I wanted him to be a part of this whole thing. But I think where I come from is, and Nate struck me as something that it kind of threw me off a little bit, because I would have thought, Nate, that because Scott is a friend and he cares about you, the sting of that would be less, because you would take it in a way that, here is somebody that really cares about my outcome. So he's only telling me this because he's trying to help me grow. And I think what I liked about the article was that it talked about criticisms that sometimes we don't get reviews until the end of the year. Well, it's hard to make an adjustment if you get a review at the end of the year, because really, quite frankly, the year is over. So then what do you do with that? That's the criticism or the growth conversation. Marvin's conversations of being direct need to happen more often. Here's an example. I worked with a guy once that, and this speaks to kind of what Nancy was talking about. I worked with a guy once, and for me, I think when people know that you care about them and you're giving them constructive feedback, to me, the sting should be less, because it's coming from a really good place. Now, if the words are good and the words are correct, the sting will be less. I think there's an equivalent there. If they don't know you care and you're just beating them down, that's a whole different thing, right? So I worked with the guy once, and many of you may not know this gentleman, KCK, but Alonzo Washington was an activist and is an activist. And when Precious Doe was beheaded 10, 12, 15 years ago with a little girl that was beheaded by her parents. He was out speaking, talking about trying to find their killers, blah, blah, blah. There's a point to this. So a gentleman in my office who's white approached me and said, you know, Lonzo Washington, he's a very well-spoken young man. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? He does a great job. He's super educated. But I said, I want to help you. You can't say that. What do you mean? He got defensive, right? There's the criticism part. He got real defensive. I said, no. I know you didn't mean anything by it. I want to help you because if you say that to someone of color, that's offensive. This is why it's offensive, because your suggestion is that when you met this young man, you didn't think he would be articulate until he started speaking. Now, if you wouldn't run into a person that was white speaking and talking about activism and say, hey, that's a pretty articulate person. You would never say that. So what I'm trying to do is help you. And he took it really well. Yeah. So the point of that is when you're coming from a really caring place, and Marvin, it doesn't mean you're not trying to get results. You're not trying to get people to grow. Care about your people. They should know that you care about them so that when you do approach them and go, you know what, your goal this month was this, you hit X. That was okay, but you're really underperforming, and this is why. You're so talented. Man, you have all these skill sets. I think if you implemented these skill sets, your number next month would be this. Just food for thought. Think about that. Let's strategize about it. Now, Marvin doesn't go with that. That's not Marvin's style. Marvin's like, no, you should have hit the number. Why didn't you hit the number? You're a scumbag for not hitting the number. You won't be here if you don't hit the number. And so it's just a different approach because we care about our people we spend so much time with. We should care about when they're growing and succeeding, but we should also care when they're failing.
The thing I would say is I relate. I share, Andre, for whatever reason, I'm kind of like Nate. Like if someone I respect and care about criticizes me, and maybe the best example of this is when I get it at home for the most important person in my life, my wife. I don't want to let her down, right? But I've learned that about myself, to the point where I've learned to just kind of try and treat every piece of criticism, no matter where it comes from, as data. And I've learned that it's best for me never to react, right? So no matter where I'm getting it from, like, so right now, Andre, if you said, Scott, quit talking, I would try and just take that as, okay, Scott, quit talking, process. And that's kind of what the article gets at from a tools perspective, right? Like if you know that about yourself, then the best thing to do is take every piece of data and walk away with it as the criticism and just not react at any point. Basically build a poker face. The one I like the most, though, which helps me out because I don't love being criticized, although I've handled it. Sports have helped me with that. My dad helped me with that. Ask for criticism. So be proactive in asking for it, right? So if I'm working with somebody like Marvin, who I have the utmost respect for, I may go to Marvin and say, Marvin, can you give me something to improve on? I'm not going to wait for Marvin to have to tell me to improve on something. Then it's bite-sized, right? I can start working through that criticism. I can work through that, and it's not coming at me when I'm not prepared. I'm going to him with it, ready to hear something that's going to help me be a better person, better at my job.
Yeah, and I would say, so Marvin, it's interesting because it sounds like you and I are a lot alike. Like no one has ever accused Nate Hogan of not being direct, right? No, that just has never happened. That has never happened in my lifetime. But what I've learned, because I've been forced into this situation, is, and I haven't gone all the way over to Andre's style necessarily either, but I do try to start with a little bit of, okay, how can I help you improve? Maybe you don't have the strategies or the tactics built into your repertoire in a way that allows you to go achieve this goal that I'm trying to help you achieve today. So let me help you build those along the way. That said, though, there is a moment in time in which you, as a leader, go, okay, you clearly either aren't putting forth the effort or you just simply can't get it and you're not cut out for this particular role. So now I'm going to sort of escalate the ways in which I'm direct. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the whole how versus the what. And so I'm direct. I'm going to give you the what you need to know, but how I deliver that what needs to be thoughtful and considerate of the dignity of the person that I'm dealing with deserves, right? Regardless of whether or not they have the capability to do the job. And look, at some point you may have to fire somebody, and you've done it, I'm sure. I've done it for sure.
Right.
But I still, even in those environments, I still try to handle them with the care that a person deserves, even though they may not be performing at a level in which they need to be to continue to work for me. So I think that how versus what is what has guided me over the years.
Yeah, Nate, you said it. Hang on, Marvin. You said it, Nate. Really, the dignity of people. I'm working with a guy now that just had to terminate somebody, and his email to me was, Will is no longer. I'm not going to say his last name, but he's no longer working with said organization, and I'm trying to find him a different career. So if you know anyone, Andre, let me know. I'd like to help him transition. So to me, what Nate talked about is that's it. So even if someone becomes not a fit, as people, as human beings, if we're having this kind of conversation, we're building this kind of relation with somebody, and they're not a fit, it doesn't have to be this angry, he was horrible in that. You can help him transition into another organization and really just be a human being. Stop being a boss, be a human being. He wasn't a fit for my organization, but I know Scott could probably use his style. So why not connect him there? And that's okay. And I just think it comes down to, the dignity of people and really trying to help people grow. When we're celebrating them when they're succeeding, and then we're criticizing the hell out of them when they're failing, that to me, people don't sustain that mental capacity in an organization. In fact, science would tell you that's a demotivating factor within an organization. Go ahead, Marvin.
Yeah, real quick, Marvin, I'm gonna let you get in. I want people to put ideas in the chat for future conversations, if you don't mind, while we hear what Mr. Carolina has to share.
I will say something, and we talked about it a little bit. I think trust and intent. When people understand your trust and your intent of who I am, it allows me to talk more freely. People understand me, and there's a few people online who know me personally. It allows me to talk more freely and more open and more direct. And what happens is people keep coming to me. Well, what do you think? You know what I'm going to say. You know I'm intense. You know I'm focused. You need to do this. You need to do this. Oh, you're always like this. Then why do you keep asking? Because they want an honest opinion of someone who they trust. And that's what I'm going to give. I'm not going to water it down. Now, I'm not absurd. I'm not mean. I'm not cruel. I don't want anyone to get that picture. But if you want an honest opinion, you're going to get that. And people, they come back again. They come back again. Well, Marvin, what do you think about this? I'm thinking, you know what I'm going to say. That's not appropriate. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. Oh, you're just always tough. But I think they can trust me to give them an honest opinion, and they know that I have their best interest in mind. You mentioned that earlier. Andre, I think, said that. They know I have their best interest. They know I'm not trying to be mean. They know I'm not trying to be malicious. They know I have their best interest, and my intent is good. But I tend to be very direct. I might try to dress it up a little bit, but it doesn't always make it.
Yeah, what I would add, I'm more than happy to stay on the call longer if people want to continue to have this conversation. I know we're kind of bumping up, but I know we went off on the front end. So if there are points that still be made, I am happy to stay longer if that's an option for folks.
Andre, this is the hour-long show. We need to start on time and we need to finish on time. We don't need to run over. You need to understand that. We're on time here.
You guys don't realize our half-hour conversations on Tuesday to prep for the day go for 2 hours.
That's a true story. It
really does.
It drives April crazy. She just kind of goes into her happy place.
And my face looks shocked because if it does, I'm a really great actress.
What other feedback? I'd love somebody else to chime in. Frank, Alexandra.
I'll chime in.
David. Yeah.
I've been listening to you guys, and I've something that you guys had mentioned is different things that we can practice to help implement, voice and other things about said circumstances. One thing that I learned whenever I studied servant leadership, and because I've been writing a servant leadership course that I finished yesterday, is that servant leadership is about accommodating needs versus wants. And when you're talking about getting feedback from other people, if you can accept that everything you're trying to do is geared toward accommodating a need, there's two needs that could potentially be accommodated in the event of feedback. The first need would be your own. You need feedback in order to be able to change, right? Because the only way to improve is to change.
Totally.
But then also the person that's giving you the feedback, there's likely a need that they have, which has led to the reason why they're giving you the feedback in the first place. And so, with everything that's been going on, something that I really noticed, I got in a conversation with my stepfather the other day. He happens to be generally, he's from a small town, not too much of a black community there. And him and I kind of I wouldn't call it an argument because, my significant other is black as well as my children are mixed. And what I explained to him, I told him, I said, Jeff, I said, you have to think about options, right? The key to leading people and the key to really having a positive impact is understanding. And if you don't do everything that you possibly can as a leader to try to understand others, then you're not a real leader. And I think as, in leadership role or everybody here as leaders, what we need to accept is that, from every perspective, there's going to be different individuals that have different opinions. But as a leader, you're really not, you have to remove opinion, because an opinion is an emotion. You have to remove the emotion and ask yourself, what is logic in this situation? And the logical explanation behind a human being is that we all have, psychological and sociological requirements that allow us to perform at our highest capacity. And if those needs, quote unquote, are not being met, then we're not going to perform at the capacity that we need to perform. So these young kids and these individuals that have said circumstances, it is apparent that those circumstances are having a significant effect on how they perform in a daily activity. Something that Marvin touched on, and I think that you did as well, Andre, that I really liked, is you said everybody's so focused on the what, but nobody's focused on the why, right? And the conversation that I had with my stepfather was, if you think about the person that's looting or rioting or whatever, what sociological and psychological need is not being met that has led to them to feel like that's necessary?
100.
And so it's not about, when you talk character is not what you do, it's who you are. And character is about values, and these values that need to be instilled in these younger individuals. Everybody's like, well, all this stuff ended, back in 1956. And it's like, well, let's ask ourselves a quick question here, right? Yeah, like on paper it ended, but the individuals that were suffering there are the parents and grandparents now. It sounds like a lot of time, but we're talking not even a few decades, right? And so what would happen at that point in time is we would have said circumstances, individual wouldn't be able to get a job, would have to get 2 jobs, whatever it is, which would lead to his children not having a father at the home on a regular basis. So he's not getting those core values and those psychological needs that are required to be a good human. Right. So I think what we need to do as leaders is we need to address it at the core. And the core is our youth. There are leaders of tomorrow. We need to instill into them that they, regardless of what background they have, they can be something great. They can, do things. But it starts with us as leadership to be able to instill those values in the people that we're leading. So that way it can just roll down the chain. Does that make sense?
It does. Frank, I think there's a lot of parallels to that and Adam's written commentary that he put in the chat earlier about we need to get down to what's really the fundamental issues in the system.
Absolutely. So sorry for going on a rant, guys. It's been kind of together in my head for like the last 15 minutes.
No, that's quite frankly, what Adam talked about in his chat and what you just talked about, Frank, is what gives me great hope. I'm attached to a lot of our urban kids right now on the nonprofit side of what I do. And I can tell you, when you talk to them, and they are our brown and black kids in urban school districts, they are so focused on what they want to do, and they give you so hope. So if adults would leave these kids alone, they are going to stop out racism. They're not going to put up with health disparities. They're not going to put on socioeconomic issues. They're not going to want to kind of gobble more and not leave people behind. They're going to want to bring people forward. And I think that's where we have to get to is and I'm about the servant leadership, by the way, too. Go Giver is an amazing book that I just have to love.
1,000,000%.
And Jenna hears me talk about this book all the time, but if you believe in that premise, when you're interacting with people, it's not about what you can accumulate or get from that person. It's what you can give to that person. And if we had that philosophy from leadership, politics, whatever, we had that kind of attitude, we wouldn't even have to be talking about racism in our country and someone that got murdered. What happens is we allow people to operate in the fashion. We go, well, but it's the cop, we'll let it go. And then we witness what we witnessed, which if you witness what I witnessed, what we saw was someone that looked like he was waiting on takeout, murdering someone. How does someone get a chance to operate like that towards another human being? There was a disconnect somewhere. That is happening with kids, because now what you're starting to see,
Exactly.
which is unbelievable, is kids duplicating that effort of the knee on a neck, and they're making a joke of it. You haven't seen these videos.
I've seen it. They're disgusting.
And it's the most insane thing. So my question is, where are the adults? Where are the parents that are calling out? I remember my daughter, who's now 20, her mom got stuck in the snow.
You have a 20-year-old daughter?
I've got a 20-year-old man and a 3.5-year-old man. Come back in the game, man. It's fun over here, man. Come on back. And so my daughter, who's 20 now, when she was probably 8 or 9, her mother got stuck in the snow. And she said, Dad, this white man helped mommy out of the snow. And I said, Jalen, that's fantastic. Tell me why you described him with this color. What was that about? Well, Dad, he was white. I go, I know, but what else about him did you recognize? If we're not willing to do that with kids, then everything we're seeing is going to permeate and continue on. So that's what it means, even in business, to be a leader. You have to have that conversation, like I have with my colleague about it while at work. You have to have that conversation. And it doesn't have to be antagonistic. It can just go, hey, I want to help. You said something that threw me. What if you thought about it? You have to do that. And that's not being, it's just being, you want to be constructive. And we're seeing now, a lot of people of color are being reached out by people that are white and saying, how can I help? We have to absorb that and give them better instruction, because in the past, there have been some that said, well, you ought to know what to do. I don't want to educate you. We can't do that. We've got people that are really trying to figure out, how do they help? What do they do? What do I read? What would you suggest? We have to help get them there, right? Because now we're in a moment where people are asking, and we haven't been in that moment before. So I wonder, what we'll do in that moment. I know I'm taking every call, and I'm suggesting 13, white fragility, the new Jim Crow, use your voice, speak out. I'm suggesting all of that information. Serve in state legislator, get involved in some things that you can have a leadership voice, represent on school boards, et cetera. And so I think all those things are going to start. I think you're going to start to see some young people really get involved in that.
Yeah, I agree.
Did Scott leave us? He left, April?
Yeah, you talk too much. He said he got to go. He can't wait for you to finish your paragraph, your dissertation, so he had to go.
Oh, is that what it was? I was only about 15 minutes shorter than what you speak, so I think we're okay.
He had to tuck his kids in the bed.
Right.
Hey, I want to thank all you guys for participating. This has truly been wonderful. Yeah. And I'd like to continue it. I think we're going to talk about what the next steps are, but this has truly been wonderful for me, and I've enjoyed participating in it. I hope you guys have too.
Yeah, same here.
Marvin?
I hope you guys come back. Go ahead, April.
I was just going to say, Marvin and Andre, you guys have been wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing your time. When we first talked about this, it was going to be one session, and then it very quickly became 4. Yeah. Now it's like a thing that will continue in perpetuity. But
I don't think this is going anywhere anytime soon, and I think it's because you guys have drawn a crowd of people who are willing to have the hard conversations. And when you look at the groups and the tile here in the Brady Bunch, they're white, they're black, they're brown, they're old, they're women, they're men. It's a really great mixture of people and across the city, which means we can start making some differences if we can figure out how to cooperate together to make some serious action.
Yeah, we got all this from you guys. We did the poll. April set the poll out. We wanted to know what you wanted to talk about versus us pushing our content on you. We asked for feedback. What's important to you, and let's talk around that. Let's just have a community chat. I've loved it just because it's been not a presentation, right? It's been a community chat where I think every opinion matters. Every point of view matters, and we want to hear those points of view. So I hope that we're able to continue. I thank you guys for your time, because I know you guys are busy, and it's an interesting time in our country, and willing to have this dialogue. And we're going to be open. Marvin and I will be open to continue to do this kind of format as long as Scott and April see value in it. If you guys see value in it, we'll send out a poll and figure out what else you want to talk about, and then we'll do the same thing if you're interested in that.
Yeah, so I'll follow up with a more detailed survey. So look for that in your email. I'm also going to share the reading list of all the suggestions that everybody mentioned today in that follow-up, and then we'll compile the next set of topics and send that out send that out and get them scheduled and let everybody know and get invites to everyone so that you can keep the conversation going. And Adam, awesome. Thank you for sharing your email. I'll make sure to get you on the list.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen 13th, the documentary, which is about the 13th Amendment, I would encourage you to watch that. It is an unbelievable documentation from a lot of educators from Harvard, all kind of ethnicities that are talking about the systematic racism that started over 400 years ago. And it is fascinating to think that there was a system created, right? To kind of keep people, it's really unbelievable. Well, it's the only way I can describe it. If you haven't, it's not about lynching. It's not about that. It's about the system from the economic engine that prisons are, what they do on the policy side, housing side, what they do with people that may be criminals to continue on slavery. I mean, it is such a, Marvin, if you haven't seen it, it is certainly worth a couple of hours watching that, and your mouth will drop. It will literally drop to the floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Andre. That's a really, really good suggestion.
Well, guys, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your week. Good to see you, Kim. Always good to see you, Jenna. Thank you guys for showing up again.
You guys take care. Talk to you soon.
Marvin.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Hey, Bruce.